Story hero. No one understood the Japanese mafia don, until a waitress replied in fluent Japanese. Maya Chen had a habit of arriving early. Not because the restaurant required it, not because her manager asked her to, but because she liked the quiet. She liked the way the dining room looked before the guests arrived, the folded napkins, the candles not yet lit, the chairs still tucked in like children asleep. There was a kind of peace in those 15 minutes before the door opened that she had never found anywhere else. Not in her apartment, not in the university library, not even in sleep. Just here, in this small Japanese fusion restaurant on the edge of downtown Los Angeles, where the walls were the color of pale cedar and the music was always something soft and stringed. She had been working at Hoshi for 8 months. It was the kind of place that attracted quiet money, corporate dinners, anniversary couples, the occasional visiting executive from Tokyo or Osaka who had been told by someone that the food was worth the detour. The menu was a careful blend of traditional Japanese technique and California ingredients, and the chef, a man named Kenji, who wore his gray hair pulled back and rarely smiled before noon, had a reputation that kept the reservation book full most nights. Maya was good at her job. She moved through the dining room without disturbing it. She remembered orders without writing everything down. She knew how to read a table, whether they wanted conversation or silence, whether they were celebrating something or working through something, whether the second glass of wine would be welcome or intrusive. She was the kind of waitress people requested when they came back. What nobody at Hoshi knew, not Kenji, not the manager David, not the other waitresses, was that Maya spoke Japanese, not menu Japanese, not phrases learned from a textbook or a travel app. She spoke it the way her mother had spoken it to her since before she could walk, with the particular rhythm of Osaka, fast and warm and slightly rough at the edges, the dialect that people from Tokyo sometimes called too casual, and that people from Osaka called honest. Her mother had come to California from Namba, a bright and crowded neighborhood in Osaka, when she was 24. She had met Maya's father at a community center, married him within a year, and built a life in Los Angeles that was half one world and half another. In their home, the two languages had mixed naturally, English for school, Japanese for comfort, and on the best evenings, both at once, tangled together the way families do when they stop performing and just live. Maya had spent 3 years in Osaka as a teenager, living with her grandmother during her mother's illness, attending a local school, shopping in the covered arcades of Shinsaibashi, learning the city from the inside out. She had come back to California with an accent that her mother called perfect, and a vocabulary that her university professor called graduate level. Now she was writing her dissertation on language identity in immigrant communities, waitressing to pay for it, and keeping both things mostly separate from each other. It was a Tuesday in late November when everything changed. The shift had been quiet, a birthday party of 6 near the window, 2 couples at separate tables, both eating slowly, both looking at their phones more than each other. A solo businessman who ordered the set menu and read a document the entire time. By 7:30, Maya had begun to think it would be one of those evenings that passed without incident, without anything worth remembering. Then the door opened. She noticed them before David did. 4 men walked in together, and the way they moved through the entrance, not rushed, not hesitant, but deliberate, like each step had been decided in advance, made the room feel slightly different. 3 of them were younger, perhaps late 30s or early 40s, wearing dark jackets and the careful neutral expressions of men who had trained themselves not to look like they were watching everything, but they were watching everything. The 4th man walked in the center. He was older, 65, maybe 68, with silver hair combed straight back from his forehead and a suit the color of a storm cloud. He was not tall, but he carried himself in a way that made height seem beside the point. He looked around the restaurant once, slowly, the way someone looks at a room they have already decided they own, and then he sat down in the corner booth that David hurried to clear for them, apologizing to the couple he had to redirect, with the smooth efficiency of a man used to having things arranged. Maya was assigned their table. She walked over with 4 menus and placed them on the table with a smile. The 3 younger men took the menus without looking at her. The older man did not take his at all. He was already looking at something on the wall, a framed piece of Japanese calligraphy that the designer had chosen mostly for its visual balance, probably without reading it carefully. "Good evening," Maya said. "Can I start you with some water or tea?" No response. Not rudeness exactly, more like she had not quite registered. The older man said something quietly, and the others nodded, and then all four of them began talking to each other. In Japanese. Not careful Japanese. Not the polished, deliberate Japanese of someone speaking a second language, or of a businessman used to international meetings. This was fast, private, Osaka Japanese, the kind spoken in the back rooms of small restaurants and in cars with the windows up, where the words came out already half finished because everyone at the table knew what the other person was about to say. Maya went to get the water. She understood every word. She came back, she poured. She stood at a slight angle, the way she always did, and she listened without appearing to listen, which is a skill, she had discovered, that bilingual people develop without meaning to. The ability to process one language while appearing to be doing something entirely else. They were talking about food at first. The older man said the last time he had eaten Japanese food in America, it had tasted like an apology, and one of the younger men laughed at that. Then they talked about the flight, about the jet lag, about someone named Hiroshi who had apparently rearranged a meeting without telling anyone. The older man's tone when he mentioned Hiroshi was not angry. Exactly. It was quieter than anger. Quieter was worse. Then they ordered, pointing at items on the menu and speaking to her in single English words, the way people do when they are not sure how much of the language the other person can understand. Fine. She wrote it down, nodded, and went to the kitchen. She kept returning to the table throughout the meal. She refilled the tea. She brought the appetizers. She cleared the plates. And each time, the conversation continued around her, smooth and uninterrupted, because why would they stop? She was furniture, polite, attentive, invisible furniture. She heard more than she meant to, or maybe exactly as much as the evening intended her to hear. The older man, the others called him Tanaka-san, always with the honorific, always with a slight pause before the name like a small bow, spoke about a meeting scheduled for December. He spoke about a figure, a large one, in a tone that suggested it was not a salary. He spoke about someone in Vancouver who needed to be reminded of something. Maya did not write any of this down. She did not need to. She was a linguistics student. She had spent years listening to the way people spoke, not just what they said. And what she heard in Tanaka-san's voice when he spoke was not the voice of a businessman exactly. It was the voice of someone who was used to finality, to conversations that ended with decisions that did not get revisited. She had grown up near enough to that world, in Osaka, to recognize its sound. By the time the main course was finished, she had decided that the wisest thing she could do was exactly what she had been doing: smile, serve, stay invisible. She brought the dessert menu. She took it away when they declined. She prepared the check. And then, without planning it, without deciding to do it at all, she answered him. Tanaka-san had asked for the bill. He had asked in English, careful, formal English, the English of someone who had learned it from books rather than from people, and Maya, who had been quiet for over an hour, who had swallowed a language for the entire length of their meal, heard herself respond. In Japanese. She told him, in the Osaka dialect she had learned from her mother and her grandmother, and 3 years of living on the streets of Namba, that the check was ready, that she hoped the meal had been to his liking, and that the yuzu in the dessert had come in fresh that morning, which was true, because Kenji made a point of sourcing it specially. She said it naturally, without showing off, without announcing what she was doing. She just said it the way she would have said it to her mother or her grandmother, easy and warm and completely real. The table went silent. Not the comfortable silence of a meal winding down, a different kind. The 3 younger men stopped mid-movement. One of them straightened slightly in his seat. Another looked at the older man with an expression that asked a question without words. Tanaka-san looked at Maya. He looked at her for a long moment, not with suspicion, or not only suspicion, with something more complicated than that. The expression of a man who has been somewhere unfamiliar for 3 days, and has just, unexpectedly, heard something familiar. He asked her, in Japanese, where she had learned to speak like that. Maya told him, Osaka, her mother. A grandmother who had never learned more than 20 words of English and had not seen the need to. 3 years in Namba as a teenager. She kept it short because she had a sense, the same sense that made her good at reading tables, that he was not the kind of man who liked long answers. He nodded slowly. He asked which part of Namba. She told him the neighborhood. Something shifted in his face, a recognition. Not a dramatic one, not a scene from a movie moment, just the small, quiet shift of someone placing a familiar coordinate on an internal map. He said that he knew the street, that there had been a noodle shop on the corner, years ago, run by a family named Suzuki. Maya said yes. She had eaten there many times. The broth had been very good, and the portions very small, and her grandmother had always said you were paying for the reputation. Tanaka-san smiled. It was not a political smile, not a professional smile, not the kind of smile used to make an impression. It was an actual smile, the kind that arrives before a person has time to decide whether to show it. For just a moment, the silver-haired man in the storm cloud suit looked like someone who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and had briefly, just briefly, set it down. He said something then that she would think about for a long time afterward. He said that speaking Japanese in America felt, most of the time, like speaking into an empty room. You knew the words were going somewhere, but there was no echo, no sign that anyone had caught them. Maya said she understood that. She said her mother used to say something similar, that living in California sometimes felt like reading a book in the wrong light. Everything was there, but the color was slightly off. Tanaka-san looked at her the way people look at someone who has said something true. The 3 younger men were watching all of this with a kind of careful attention, not concern, more like the alertness of people who are used to watching their employer for signals and were not sure what this particular signal meant. Tanaka-san reached for the bill. He looked at it briefly and placed a card on top of the tray. Then he stood, and the others stood immediately with him, and he said goodnight to Maya in Japanese, and she said goodnight in Japanese, and he walked out of the restaurant with the same deliberate calm with which he had entered it. Maya stood at the table for a moment after they were gone. She picked up the tray. The tip was in cash, folded neatly, placed under the edge of the teacup, the way tips are sometimes left in Japan, not tossed down, but placed. When she counted it later in the kitchen, it was $600 on a $340 bill. On top of the cash was the card. It was small and plain, with no name and no number. Just a single line of Japanese characters, written by hand in ink that had dried a deep, certain black. She read it standing at the kitchen counter, while Kenji pretended not to notice. It said, roughly, "A person who carries a language carries a home. Protect both." She read it twice. Then she slipped it into her apron pocket and went back out to the dining room, where the birthday party was asking for more candles. She did not tell her colleagues what she had heard during the meal. Some of it she let go deliberately, like releasing a breath she had been holding. Not her story, not her world, not her responsibility to carry. And some of it she simply did not have words for in any language, which was unusual for her. What she kept was the other thing. The image of a man who had walked into a room carrying everything he was, his history, his power, his world, all of it invisible to everyone around him, and who had, for 10 minutes over a cleared dinner table, been simply a person from Osaka, talking to another person from Osaka about a noodle shop that made small portions and charged full price for them. Language does that. She had known it academically for years. She knew it now in a different way. It does not just carry information, it carries people. It finds them in rooms where they thought they were alone, and it says, "I know where you are from. I can hear it in you. You do not have to explain it here." She rode the bus home at 11:15. She opened her dissertation and underlined a sentence she had read before, but that meant something new to her now. Outside, Los Angeles moved past the window, enormous and bright, and full of people speaking languages no one around them could hear. She closed the book. She looked out at the lights. She thought about her mother. She thought about Osaka. She thought about the particular way Tanaka-san had smiled when she mentioned the noodle shop, like a window opening in a room that had been closed too long. Then the bus reached her stop, and she got off, and she walked home through the cool November air, carrying, as she always did, everything she was. End of story.